Hello, hello, hello. I was just watching VswitchZero's video here, and it's quite lunchtime, so I thought I'd just think about some of the past stuff. And he's talking about upgrading 486s and Pentiums, which is something I did back in the day an awful lot. So our first PC we had at home was a Watford Electronics 486 SX250 megahertz. I recently did a blog post about some of the issues that came up later in my software engineering education because I had an SX. Uh, Ostensibly, the SX was a processor that had the floating point co-processor disabled. It was broken. The fab didn't work. So rather than throw away a perfectly good wafer, they would actually disable the floating point that had failed test, but ship the processor anyway. And you generally got compilers that would figure this out, detect the difference in processor type, and it would generate multiple additions for multiplication, for example. This made it much slower when you were trying to do floating point work. Multiplications and things in floating point was very strange for it. I can't remember the details, but I remember one thing that I'd used, um, an obscure piece of software called Catty or Catty Link, and it basically produced BCD. It changed everything into binary code decimal, ran everything through integer registers, and then converted everything back to do numerics. It's very slow until I got Personal Pascal and later a C compiler, Lattice C, and not Lattice C, not Personal Pascal, Turbo Pascal and Turbo C. I'm thinking about my ST before that. So I had all this bits and bobs. But one thing that vSwitchZero here has just talked about is that they've had a machine that would have a slow Visa bus. And I think I ran into this with that first 486 SX25 that the family had. And the problem was that it had an integrated ISA card that had a custom or a bespoke CD-ROM controller, and we had a dual-speed CD-ROM in this machine. It was bought as a multimedia machine. It had a 3.5-inch floppy, a 20 megabyte hard drive, I think, and a dual speed CD-ROM. The hard drive may have been bigger than 20 megabytes. I can't actually fully remember, but I have a distinct memory of having to buy 30 floppy disks to back it up with MS Backup. Yeah. So, a slow Visa bus. Now, I didn't even think about this. If that machine had a slow Visa bus, the problems we were seeing with it in some of the multimedia applications could never have been solved. So, how would you solve it? Well, the answer would be to make the bus faster. And thinking about it, the 486 SX25, sorry, the SX25 that I saw at college, they were fixed. They couldn't be overclocked. I don't think our SX250 could be either. And I got the SX2 because college had the SX flat. I thought I got a better deal. It was slightly faster. So we called on our support with Watford Electronics and said, "Hey, this isn't doing what we thought it would do. It's stuttering, it's stammering, it's not doing things." Now it played Encarta pretty well, and it would play music and it would do, but video decoding, it was awful at it, and it was all probably, in my opinion, CPU and bus throttling. We added double RAM. It was no big deal. Everything seemed to work except this one feature. And it came to a head, as all things did for me back then, for games. I was trying to play Civ 2. Everything would stutter and stammer. It was a real pain. It just didn't work properly. And it didn't work as advertised. The machine actually had an advert with Civ 2 on it. So, back to support, called them all up. Engineer came out, and obviously this was a guy, this was support that you would buy if you were in an office environment. My mother had bought it for a home PC. So this poor engineer turned up and spent the afternoon with these two little boys, which we were. What was I, 16? And my brother was 13. And he had to deal with us staring over his shoulder. And of course, PC support by then took hours. It took absolutely hours and hours and hours. Now, I don't know why it took so long. I really don't. Because I look back on it now and I think he could have just tried a CPU, information program to see what speed it was running at. Because I had no such program. He could have then perhaps seen there was some bottleneck throttling or whatever going on. And there was no heatsink on this 46SX 250. And it got hot. And later on, I bought a small 40mm by 40mm heatsink, just as you see in this video on this Pentium Overdrive, for that purpose. I bought it so I could cool the chip, and it ran a little bit better. But still, this stuttering persisted. And the guy came and went, and he still persisted. And he came again a few weeks later, and it still persisted. In the end, they packaged the whole machine up and sent it back to them. And they sent it back with a 486DX2 66 processor in it, which of course made things a bit better. It was the same motherboard because we actually had it marked for security, but they changed the chip for free. But it still did this stuttering, and the guy came out again and gave us a DX4 100, okay, and the stuttering stopped. I think that's where the bus or the processor bottleneck went away. But we're talking in this video, or VswitchZero is talking about the Pentium Overdrive chip. I thought going from an SX2 to a DX4 was like night and day. My compiles were so much quicker, the performance of the machine was so much quicker. It was so much nicer of an experience. And I kept that machine running for quite a while. It was still running, purchased 1995. It was still with me in 2003 as just a box under the stairs doing bits and bobs for me. So that's kind of where it, I unfortunately stripped it, took it apart. It started breaking down. Things didn't go right with it. I tried to rebox it. It wasn't quite happy. And it had these bespoke Watford electronic parts in it. And they just really ruined bits and bobs of the system. Taking them out now, I perhaps should have realised they were bespoke. I'm not even sure it was a standard ISA connector. I from memory, it was something slightly custom. But yeah, I just remember this stuff going on. I remember there being one double length ISA card, as you see in this video now, with the brown extension at one end. I remember there being a bank of 3 other standard ISAs, then this special connector, and then 2 PCI, I think, connectors. I may be misremembering that. There was something white. It had an S3 video card with 4 megabytes of RAM, and it played Doom fantastically. But yeah, that's just my little trip down memory lane thanks to VswitchZero.